Upgrades. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another JVS movie review. Now, this is a film that I'm not going to say I was anticipating. As much as I love the Conjuring universe, The First Nun could be the worst film in the Conjuring universe. It's possibly up there with the first Annabelle. So, even getting news that they're going to do a sequel to The Nun, I was like, I don't necessarily know if this is something I would want to see, even though The Nun, I think, still is the highest grossing film in the series. I don't necessarily think it's the best reviewed or received film of the series, but here we are, The Nun 2, and here's a quick synopsis. In 1956 France, a priest is violently murdered and Sister Irene begins to investigate. Once again, she comes face to face with a powerful evil, and this is directed by Michael Chaves, and this stars Taissa as Sister Irene again, Joseph Bloquet as Frenchie, Stormy Reid as Sister Deborah, and oh, let me not forget, Anna Popwell as Kate, and Catherine Downey as Sophie. Now, if anyone remembers The First Nun, we saw Frenchie go back to save Sister Irene, and this one almost picks up years later after that incident, and we're introduced to a very violent murder that happens at the beginning of this film, with this evil nun that comes back and murders a priest in the church. And this is supposed to springboard us back to Sister Irene, back to her being in a new church, and we hear rumors about what she went through. And then she's asked to investigate this new murder. Here's the problem. We know from the way the First Nun was framed that priests are the ones who do this, because priests give exorcisms, not nuns. But this film really leaned into it just being a nun-centric, woman-centric plot. Even with the introduction of Stormy Reid's character, who is a nun who has faith issues, and because of her faith issues, she's not seen as someone who actually help here. But after she realizes that Sister Irene is going on this dangerous mission, she decides to tag along with her. Now, also at the exact same time, we get Frenchie at a boarding school, and him really looking after having a very sweet relationship with this young girl, Sophie, and her mom. But also we see that it's something wrong with Frenchie. We get moments of seeing glimpses of it looking like either Frenchie's been affected too much by what happened in the last film, or an evil presence is following him. But we don't know which one it is. But because of these things happening in the parallel universe of Sister Irene investigating everything going on with the nun and the new murders that she finds out about, while also Frenchie is going in this boarding school, going through a lot of haunted situations, and the kids are starting going through haunted situations here. It's a parallel timeline for both stories, but they don't intertwine to each other until possibly like the late second half, third act of the film, where we get them to coincide with one another and it becomes one big story. The problem is, at times, the pacing seems out of place because of that parallel, because we're jumping from Sister Irene and everything that's happening with her, and then we're jumping back towards Frenchie and everything that's happening in the boarding school. I think it can leave the audience at times a little lost on which storyline one that they should be paying attention to, or which storyline makes the most sense to pay attention to. It's so convoluted in the way they're trying to execute this story, but it still works better than The First Nun. So I think that's what's going to excite people here. With The First Nun, you wanted more excitement, you wanted more horror moments, more gory moments, you wanted the things that the Conjuring universe does really well. You get that here in this film, but it's just not the storyline that really works with the top tier films of the Conjuring universe, like the first two Conjuring films, or Annabelle Creation and things of that nature, where those storylines were so great and it used those horror elements to up the ante. Here, this film still rests solely on the horror elements of it. The storyline is extremely basic and at times extremely hard to follow. And even by the time we get to the third act, where we get several big reveals in it, none of them feel earned enough to really have to pay a lot of attention to. But the horror moments are the moments that you're like, oh, okay, maybe this could make this a little better. By the end of the film, it still leaves you with the same questions that we had at the end of the first Nun film, which is, this evil presence takes place in the future in Conjuring 2. How do we get from there, from here to there? How do we get from the 1956 setting to the 1970s setting? And it doesn't necessarily feel like it really bridges the universe together in the way the past films used to do, of how we even got the introduction of the Nun. Is because of the way they bridge those things together. Even La Llorona, which is, again, another film on the lower rung of the Conjuring films, I think it still did a better job of connecting itself to the rest of the films. The Nun feels like it can stand alone as something that is definitely in the universe, but separate at the same time. But these characters aren't necessarily the most interesting characters to follow. And it makes it really, really difficult to get invested in the Nun the way we got invested in the Conjurings, or even in the Annabelles. Even the last Annabelle film felt more connected and more grounded than this Nun sequel feels, and I think that's the issue here. Maybe this series is not necessarily the best series to stand alone on its own. Maybe if we get a Nun 3, maybe connecting it to the grander universe can actually bring home the point of why this character is needed at this point. Because now, after 2 films, and while the second one is a lot better than the first one, it kind of makes you wonder, why do we even need this character besides to pop up in a Conjuring movie to scare the bejesus out of you there, instead of getting an entire film centralized on this character? But The Nun 2 brought to you from New Line Cinema, and this came out, well, it's Friday now, so today. It dropped today. Out of a possible 10, I'm going to give The Nun 2 5.5 out of 10. It has its moments that really work. The problem is the plot is just too convoluted to pay attention to. It's too much going on here. And instead of having Sister Irene go on this world tour of horror and death and mayhem, and having Frenchie on the other end of this, trying to figure out what's going on with him, and then the kids with Sophie, and then this teacher who you don't really care about, and this whole story wrapped around this boarding school that, if you would have focused possibly just on the school and had Sister Irene from the beginning go to the school, I think you would have got a much better film. So again, it's just about focus here, and that lack of focus is what shakes this movie to the point where, as a horror movie, it's passing, but not necessarily something that you need to revisit, which unfortunately is the issue with the first Nun film, is that you felt you didn't have to revisit it to even be invested in the Conjuring universe, and the Nun 2 did nothing to improve that. But check it out, let us know what you think. This has been another JVS movie review. Peace, people.